Other way, since the people do not want this, they're going to shove it down the people's throat by judicial mandate. And in fact, that every state, the 6 that have same-sex marriage, have done so without the consent of the people. And Senator Murray, who was the prime sponsor of 5688, actually stated that it had an incremental approach here, that the ultimate goal was marriage. It's clear that this is a softball pitch to the Supreme Court, 3 of whose members had stated that if it comes up again and you have parity in the law, as 5688 establishes, then they would rule the other way. The likely ruling will be a 7-2 instead of a 5-4 upholding DOMA. DOMA will be overturned, the Defense of Marriage Act, and the courts will once again intervene in their usurpacious way and mandate what we the people do not desire.
Getting down to brass tacks, ladies and gentlemen at home watching our forum, the next question is for Joseph Blackham and followed by Mr. Wilbur. And the question is the primary objection to Referendum 71 because the word marriage is within the referendum?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's one that we get a lot, and it's something of a semantic argument, because when you read your ballot and you get it in the mail, it's going to describe what it does, but domestic partnership is not marriage. If you go through and read the 114 pages of the bill itself, which I suspect none of you will, but if you did, you would see that 180 times it says that for all intents and purposes, same-sex domestic partners shall be treated the same as married couples. So if they're treated the same, if there are things with no legal difference, then in some sense they're the same. So if you believe that if A equals B and B equals C, that A equals C, then this is legal marriage to the extent it can be created in Washington State. They are correct when they say that there are federal benefits that do not apply, and when it goes out of state, those are differences. But Washington State cannot control what federal law does, obviously, and to the extent that it would be possible in Washington State, this would be marriage. There's no legal difference between those two institutions. Still, is that the primary objection to this? And that depends on the individual, of course. But for me, it is not the primary objection. I do think there is a special purpose for the institution of marriage that transcends, the living arrangements that people have. But I think that, as I've stated, that the primary objection to me on this is that it would say over 180 times that there is no difference between homosexual and heterosexual relationships. And the impact of that is that those who disagree, and they will continue to exist regardless of what happens here with Referendum 71, but those who disagree would be forced to the margins of society. They would not be able to contract with society in the same way that people who disagreed with this, based on a moral or religious belief. And I think that is a significant infringement on individual liberties, the rights of conscience, the rights of liberty. And to illustrate this point, during the legislative session when this was passed, I was working in the legislature to amend this bill. And what we proposed was an amendment that touched none of the benefits, that every one of the benefits would have been extended, but the legislation would have contained language that would have protected rights of conscience and religious freedom in such a way that no one could be punished because of their beliefs about what marriage is and the difference between these relationships. That legislation, or that amendment, was rejected because the purpose of this is not simply to extend benefits. The purpose of this is to take a moral position in Washington State that there is no difference between these two, and that implication would run through education. It would run through this everywhere the state of Washington works and contracts and has business, which is virtually everywhere. You would be forced to agree with that if you wanted to work cooperatively with the state, and I think that's unfortunate.
Mr. Wilbur.
Here's what R71 says. It says, this bill would expand the rights, responsibilities, and obligations accorded state-registered same-sex and senior domestic partners to be equivalent to those of married spouses, except that a domestic partnership is not a marriage. This does not provide all the legal benefits of marriage. I can't go out of this state and get those benefits. The key protections and obligations in this law include the right to extend insurance to a partner just as a married person can cover their spouse, the right to use family and medical leave to care for a seriously ill partner, Right now, if my partner were seriously ill and my employer did not want me to take time off, then I would have to take unpaid medical leave, even though a coworker who was married would be paid to look after their seriously ill spouse. The right to inherit, own, and operate a small business owned by a partner. Death benefits for the partners of police and firefighters killed in the line of duty. The police associations and the firefighters associations have both endorsed this bill. Pension benefits for the partners of teachers and other public employees in the event of their death. Without this bill, the partners of teachers and our public servants would lose their pension benefits. The right to workmen's compensation benefits if a partner is killed on the job. In a time of stress, the last thing that a person needs to worry about is whether or not they are going to get their workman compensation benefits or their pension benefits. These are benefits that people earned and have paid in for. These are not benefits being doled out by the state. These people have paid equal taxes, and all we are asking for is equal treatment. The right to adopt a partner's child without paying for a home study. Victims' right, including the right to receive benefit allowances, and the right to use sick leave. I don't understand why there is any objection to Referendum 71. I find it immoral in this country to treat people differently. I don't want more rights than you, Joe. I want the same rights as you.
The next question is from Mr. Wilbur, followed by Mr. Blackham. The question is, do you feel that your personal background has had some to do with your support of Referendum 71?
Yes.
Or objection, I should say.
I don't object to Referendum 71, and I don't think any fair-minded person in Washington State would find a reason to object to approving Referendum 71. All Referendum 71 is doing is asking that the families in Washington State be treated equally. I have been a second-class citizen since I was 7 years old and realized that I was a gay man. It is spiritually damaging. It is damaging to the soul. Yes, my background influences the way I feel about Referendum 71. I don't care what you call it. You know, you can call it domestic partnership. You can call it a civil union. Just as long as all state and federally sanctioned relationships are called the same thing and all the citizens receive the same protection and privileges under the law. I just want to be treated the same way, fairly. That's the American way.
And your response or your answer?
It would be, I think, somewhat silly to say that our personal backgrounds do not affect how we feel about life around us, and public policy is one of those things. And so, yes, my personal experience does affect how I feel about this. But what I would like to, responding to his comments about second-class citizenship, I'd like to make a point on the rhetoric we hear about the equality issue and whether or not we are treating people as second-class citizens. And the issue of marriage, there are 4 limiting factors in who a person can marry in the kind of relationships that the state currently recognizes. You cannot marry somebody who is a close relative, closer than a second cousin. You cannot marry somebody who is already married. You cannot marry somebody who is a minor. And you cannot marry someone of the same gender. Now, that limits everyone equally in the same way. Now, I realize that some people want some of those options, but the only limiting factor that we are trying to take off the table right now in this overarching discussion is the gender limitation, which means that you will still not be able, the state will continue to treat unequally relationships that might exist, and in fact do exist, involving people who are family members, involving people who are already married, and involving minors. And the minor one I'll kind of take off the table. But the reality is there are many people for a variety of reasons who choose to live outside the institution of